I mean, first of all, one of the things that's happened as a result of WikiLeaks, of of what Chelsea Manning did, of what Edward Snowden did, is that they kind of knocked the elite clique of journalists who would traffic in a trickle down of state secrets or stories on classified documents, and they instead went to independent journalists who were not affiliated with enormous media outlets. Now, why do I bring that up in the context of Democracy Now? I bring it up because the era of the elite corporate media is coming to an end, and what is going to emerge as the sort of new standard for powerful independent journalism. When you look at the landscape, there are great experiments happening right now in media. I'm engaged in one right now with Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras. We're trying to build a news organization called The Intercept. Democracy Now! Was way ahead of the curve when it came to thinking of community-based journalism that had a international and national focus. This show started as a radio show that was just focused on the elections in 1996, and it has now evolved to become the single greatest independent media outlet that we have in this country, consistently breaking big stories, taking on stories that are in the news but are not being covered from the bottom up. I would compare Democracy Now! To journalism as Howard Zinn was to history. And every city where Democracy Now! Ends up on the airwaves, local journalism, local media outlets are strengthened by its presence. So, I mean, it would be incredibly important for Pittsburgh to have Democracy Now! On with the strongest frequency possible and with as much access as people can have. And the main reason is that I think it will help to build pro-democracy movements on a local level in this city. We often only talk about that in the context of foreign affairs, but it's very important in this country. So I think I've found time and again in every city that I go to, Democracy Now! Becomes a sort of focal point that people can organize around, especially when it comes to independent media outlets. So it's a tremendously vital part of a lot of communities in this country, and you know, I'm glad that it's here in Pittsburgh. I wish it was heard in a more widespread way here.
A sure way for one to lift himself up is by helping to lift someone else. Booker T. Washington. Welcome to the 2014 Thomas Merton Center Award Dinner. Thank you. Over the last 4 decades, the Thomas Merton Center has evolved into being a peace and justice center that focuses on the important task of raising moral consciousness around the world's most challenging issues. Much has been achieved, but there is still much more to do. We thank all of you for attending this evening in support of our mission. And tonight we invite you to join us by becoming a member of the center. Membership envelopes are on the middle of your table. We have a special introductory rate of $25 this evening for new members. Please consider joining as you learn more about us this evening. We will collect the membership envelopes at the end of the evening. Now, I ask that you please hold your applause until I thank all the organizations and people that have made this evening possible. First, let's give thanks to you. We owe thanks to every person who is sitting in this room. But in particular, we thank our sponsors. We have a wonderful anonymous donor who I hope he or she is among us this evening. The Heinz Design Center, Carol Beal, the Press Club of Western PA, TMC's Anti-War, Anti-Drone Committee, the Black and White Reunion, Bonnie DiCarlo, Certified Public Financial Planner, the Council on American and Islamic Relations, the Titus Family, LaRoche College, Lamberton Associates, Point Park University, and the Service Employees International Union. Let's give every one of our sponsors a round of applause. We also welcome our partner peace and justice organizations and the Thomas Merton Center's 24 projects who have joined us this evening. Many of you met at the display tables in the back of the room. We thank each of them for joining with us as we work towards successful collaborations and the goal of building cross-issue support to create real change in the world. We thank our very active board and staff for dedicating their life works to growing the vision of our Peace and Justice Center. I'm going to ask, actually, for the board and the staff of the Thomas Merton Center to please stand and be recognized. We thank our office volunteers for their help, which makes our small center strong and stable. Most importantly, and this is something as someone who works in higher education, I always like to thank those who are students in the space. And for the Thomas Merton Center, we recognize our interns, who are really our future leaders, who inspire us daily with their creativity and the vision of living in a peaceful and healthier world. So if there are any Thomas Merton Center interns or former interns in the space, can I ask you to please stand? Because it's very important for us to recognize any of those individuals present. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce this evening's MC, Mr. Tony Norman. Tony is Pittsburgh's own Jeremy. He's our own award-winning investigative journalist and activist who have led us on a journey of insight and solidarity this evening. And Tony, I have to say, we thank you so very much for coming and being our MC for this evening. Let's give him another round of applause. And I'm going to turn this over to him. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. All right, thank you. I seem to have gotten a promotion there. I'm not an investigative journalist. I mean, I'm more of a shit stirrer-upper. And an investigative journalist is a very special sort of being in the ecology of journalism. And Jeremy Scahill is an investigative journalist par excellence. And when I was asked, to MC this event, you know, I jumped at it because I'm a big fan of Jeremy Scahill and have been for years. He's an incredible journalist, the sort of journalist who can go on TV and wear a leather jacket and be totally righteous and sort of hang in there. It doesn't matter if it's Meet the Press or whatever. You know, this guy, he comes, he bangs it, he tells the truth, and I really appreciate that. And it's funny, you know, driving over here this evening, I was, you know, from the PG, I was listening to NPR. I was listening to National All Things Considered. And you know, I have nothing against those folks at NPR. I mean, they're perfectly pleasant sounding people. They're very nice, and they're very nice people. I've met many of them, and they're nice. But their calculated inoffensiveness is offensive at a time like this. And And they were gassing on and on and on about the new incoming class of House and Senate freshmen. The overwhelming majority of them are Republicans. And they were going on and on about, talking about these folks who were coming in who said that, their number one thing when they're not going to be handing the country over to the Koch brothers will be improving constituent services. And I just, I was just gripping the steering wheel, just trying not to drive off the bridge and gritting my teeth through it all, because the journalists were acting as if there's nothing strange about the lowest turnout, voter turnout since 1942, and the takeover of our system. And it may be that there really isn't much of a difference between Democrats and Republicans, the way these toothless Democrats just sort of rolled over and were just the worst. They didn't deserve to get elected. But having said that, do you jump off a cliff or do you throw yourself into a furnace? And it's one of those things, And so this is a long way of saying I really appreciate Jeremy Scahill, because he is not the sort of journalist who would just pretend that 6 of one and half a dozen of the other when you have something horrible like this happen. And that he has passion and he has grit and he's able to say and articulate and prove that all is not right in this country, and that he is not afraid to do that. He wrote a book a few years ago, published a book a few years ago called Dirty Wars. And if you can get through 10 pages of Dirty Wars without immediately dropping into a fetal position, then you are a better human being than me, because it is gripping, and it is horrible, and it is our world today. And this man has managed to, why is he even still alive? He should be assassinated, but he's here. And we should enjoy him, and we should thank him. So, and actually, I'm supposed to introduce somebody else right now. Art Donsky, a newer Thomas Merton Center board member, is the director and founder of Rabbi Without Walls in Pittsburgh. And he is now a candidate for a master's degree in social work at the University of Pittsburgh with a focus on community organizing. Before retiring in June 2013, he served as a community and congregational rabbi on local campuses and in North Hills for 21 years. He was also a co-founder of J Street in Pittsburgh and served on the Jewish Voices for Peace Rabbinic Cabinet. Art proudly lives in the city and works for the day when Pittsburgh will be the most livable city for all of its residents. Please, Art, get up here and save me. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be here, to be with Jeremy and to be with Tony, who I know I speak for many of us in here as one of our local heroes, that when his column appears, and sometimes the falafel is just the falafel, right? But before I offer some words of meditation and prayer, some of you may know I want to ask us just to take a moment and send good wishes across the Atlantic to a dear teacher of many of us. Thich Nhat Hanh is seriously ill in France. And so they say he is passing, and not sure what that means in our Western sort of vocabulary. So I just ask us for a moment, please. I want to share some words with you of the center's namesake, Thomas Merton, of blessed memory, otherwise known as Brother Lewis. He wrote these words: "Our job is to love others without stopping to inquire whether or not they are worthy. That is not our business, and it in fact is nobody's business. What we are asked to do is to love. And this love itself will render both ourselves and our neighbors worthy." So as we gather this evening to celebrate humbly, we ask the Holy One to help us love others without stopping. Indeed, not asking who is worthy and who is not. To love and not to hate. To love and not to judge. To love and not discriminate. For through our love of all the universe's creatures, large and small, we will all be worthy, we will all be blessed, and we will make this world a kinder, gentler, peace-filled place, doing our jobs for which we have been created. May it be so.
First of all, I'd like to just, I think we should all thank the hotel staff for its service. They're doing great work here. Their union, someone just shouted, their union, you know, their service reminds us of the kind of people who built this country. You know, they put in an honest day's work for honest day's pay, and all they want is some respect and some appreciation, and I think this is the sort of crowd that can give it to them. So if we can just give them one more round. And keep in mind that there's an amazing raffle in the back room in front of the banquet hall. So take time to buy a raffle ticket. And if you are fortunate, you may win an overnight stay in New York City. And you'll get an electric bike, a wine basket, and admissions to many local cultural events. And for those who become members of the Thomas Merton Center this evening, you will be entered into a raffle to receive one of the peaceful prints displayed in the hallway outside the banquet room. The Thomas Merton Center is now 650 members strong and growing stronger each day. So consider joining this very active community and help make peaceful and nonviolent change possible at the local and global level. Now I'd like to introduce Mary Jo Guercio, the board president of the Thomas Merton Center. And if I screwed up her last name, I am going to hang myself here. Mary Jo helped establish the center's strategic plan and is now in her second term as board president. Mary Jo?
Yes, I'm really standing. I know you can't see me. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this very special occasion. We have the honor of recognizing an outstanding work of Jeremy Scahill tonight. Jeremy is a former national security correspondent for The Nation. He is also a lifetime senior producer and correspondent for Democracy Now!, where he remains a frequent contributor to the program. Jeremy has reported on combat locations ranging from Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Yemen, and the former Yugoslavia. An investigative journalist, Scahill has helped to expose the presence of black war mercenaries in the U.S. and around the globe. This has been more evident in the documentary Dirty Wars, which is taken from Jeremy's book, Dirty Wars, The World is a Battlefield. For those of you who have not yet seen the movie, I encourage you to attend the showing of the movie tomorrow at 4 p.m. at the Melwood Screening Room in Oakland, where Jeremy will make some opening remarks. Jeremy's reporting has sparked congressional inquiries and an International Department of Homeland Security investigation. Jeremy's work has resulted in some journalism's highest honors. As you might know or have heard, Jeremy has laryngitis. Well, I had the honor to sit next to his father tonight, and what he said to me was, "Boy, I wish Jeremy had this when he was a young boy." So, Jeremy, please step forward.
I do want to apologize in advance. I don't normally sound like this. I was going to just come up and say, "I'm Batman." I was talking to a couple of reporters tonight, local reporters, before I came up, and one of the reporters from the local weekly paper, I said, "I'll share with you my notes for tonight," and then just showed her my blank notebook. You know, if I was giving a talk to high school students or college students or fellow journalists, I feel like I would know what to say. And you know, as Mary Jo mentioned, I've won some awards in journalism, and they definitely meant a lot to me. I mean, you know, part of being an investigative journalist is that you feel like you're sort of alone a lot of times, or that you're shouting in an empty room. But when I got the email telling me that I had informing me that I was going to receive the Thomas Merton Award, I was really humbled and actually blown away. I would imagine that outside of this room or outside of the Merton Center and some small other communities around the country, that most people under the age of 40 have no idea who Thomas Merton was. I didn't have to Google Thomas Merton when I received that email, because I grew up in a house where my father had intended to be a priest. My mom changed that. Although I want to make clear that I think that if he did want to be a priest and be with my mom, I think he should have been able to do that too. I read the Seven-Story Mountain when I was a sophomore in high school. And we had the books of Dorothy Day and David Dellinger, great theological thinkers, the amazing Episcopalian theologian William Stringfellow, who was an amazing thinker and activist. And you know, I didn't know until I was probably 13 or 14 years old that my father had actually lived at the Catholic Worker with Dorothy Day in New York, and that he was on the 2nd Venceremos Brigade to Cuba. And I didn't know, and you know, I'm now the parent of a 14-year-old who shockingly reminds me of myself, which makes me feel really terrible about how I treated my parents. But it's interesting because for the first time the other day, my daughter at the dinner table asked me, "Dad, what do you do?" And I kid you not, that's the first time she's actually said to me, "What do you do?" I mean, she knows I'm a journalist, but she meant it in the sense of what is your life about? And I remember asking my dad that, and then feeling later like I was such an idiot for not having asked it earlier, because it opened this whole world to me about my own father that I didn't realize existed. And it was the first time I actually thought that maybe a little part of him was cool. And it was amazing for me, having grown up in that household. And as I said, it's why I know who Thomas Merton was. But quite by accident, I ended up meeting Philip and Daniel Berrigan in 1995 in Washington, D.C. I had dropped out of the University of Wisconsin, where I wouldn't say that I attended the University of Wisconsin. I would say I was enrolled in the University of Wisconsin. But I dropped out of school after my third year of being enrolled there. And I hitchhiked to Washington, D.C. in 1995. And I had been involved with struggles for justice for people who were homeless on the campus of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I got fed up with the hypocrisy of the professors who in their classroom would preach a social justice gospel, but then when it came time to stand with students who were protesting, there was just this universal silence, and I decided that I wanted to have the rubber meet the road and actually go and live in a homeless shelter. And so I moved out to Washington, D.C., and I moved into, at the time, what was the CCNV. No, well, it was CCNV before, and then I went to Jonah House. Are you writing my biography? No, I'm just kidding. The Community for Creative Nonviolence, which at the time was the nation's largest homeless shelter. It was 3 blocks from the U.S. Capitol. It was a building that had been seized by activists, Mitch Snyder and Carol Fenley and others, and they took over this building, and then they did a lot of direct action against the Reagan administration, including releasing rats onto the lawn of the White House to run and attack Nancy Reagan and the ketchup vegetable posse. And I was living at this homeless shelter and was cleaning toilets and mopping floors. And unbeknownst to me, that summer was the 50th anniversary of the US nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the entire peace movement sort of descended on DC for a month of remembrance, of direct action, of activism. And so all of these people, these incredible activists from different generations, and from the top of the pyramid of David Dellinger, who at the time was in his 80s, all the way down to young, up-and-coming radical Jesuit priests, and everything in between was there. And I was at a demonstration one day at the Pentagon, and Liz McAllister, who's an incredible activist and defrocked nun. She married Phil Berrigan, who was a priest at the time. They married each other while he was in prison for the Harrisburg conspiracy trial. Liz McAllister had asked me, she said, "Would you mind taking my brother-in-law to the bathroom?" And she presents me with her brother-in-law, and he was a very slight man wearing a makeshift, he called it a monkey suit, but a makeshift priest's outfit. And he had this necklace on with a little peace bird on it, the dove. And she said, this is my brother-in-law, Daniel Berrigan. And I knew exactly who he was, and I was floored. And she's asking me to take him to go take a piss, basically. So we're not in a church, are we? Okay, fine. Sorry, Thomas Merton. I think he would have supported that, though. So at the time, this is pre-9/11, you actually could just kind of walk into the Pentagon. So Daniel Berrigan and I walk into the Pentagon, and we go to a men's bathroom, and we are standing there in front of the urinals, and I'm peeing next to Father Daniel Berrigan, and he says, when this place was built, the President of the United States said that after the war, he would turn it into a hospital. And I'm like, okay, is he having a senior moment here? And And he's like, and he, he kept his word. It's the largest insane asylum in the world. Through Daniel Berrigan, I ended up meeting Philip Berrigan, who convinced me in one conversation to up and move to Baltimore to help them build a house for their intentional community called Jonah House. And I lived there with Phil Berrigan and Liz McAllister, and it's when I first met the great folk singer Ann Feeney, who's with us tonight. That was almost 20 years ago. That's insane. I feel like an old man now. But what I basically did for a year was paint houses with Phil Berrigan, and I had an incredible education that you could never get at any university anywhere. And we would talk all day, and we would listen to, he loved talk radio, and it was right around the time when this incredible journalist was sort of coming to prominence named Amy Goodman. And I remember when I started listening to Amy Goodman, you're hearing her show, and she's reporting on police brutality, and they had just been Democracy Now! Had just been thrown off of every station in the state of Pennsylvania for airing the prison commentaries of Mumia Abu-Jamal, and she would interview rebels in the Congo fighting to overthrow the US-backed dictatorship of Mobutu Sese Seko, and then they would go and talk about people who were doing actions on the border to protest deportations and the treatment of immigrants who were crossing the border without papers, and then asking very tough questions of politicians, the likes of which you would never hear on big television or read about in the newspapers. And I'll never forget hearing her confront Newt Gingrich, who at the time was the Speaker of the House. For the younger people in the room, if you just Google Newt Gingrich and lizard, you'll see a great part of American history. But Newt Gingrich, of course, had brought to power the contract against America. They called it the contract with America. And they had this, I mean, it's amazing because this new Congress that is going to be seated is probably going to be the most hardline right-wing Congress since that era of Newt Gingrich and the contract with America. And Newt Gingrich, they were anti-poor, they were pro-military, they wanted to roll back women's rights to a different century, and Gingrich was and is a very, very arrogant man, and he implemented. This was in the sort of the advent of the C-SPAN era. He implemented what he called a daily speaker's press briefing. So he every day would hold a press briefing and would capture endless hours of time for the 5 people watching C-SPAN. But it was, it was this thing where he said, every day I'm going to come and I'm going to lay out our agenda. And right around the time that he started doing this, Amy Goodman was going to those press briefings every day. And the night before this particular press briefing that I'm going to tell you about, Newt Gingrich's mother was interviewed by a woman who at the time was one of the most famous news people in America, Connie Chung. And Connie Chung interviewed, I'm sure some people remember this, Newt Gingrich's mother, and it was like one of the most watched programs in American news history, and she asked Newt Gingrich, Newt Gingrich's mother, what does Newt think about First Lady Hillary Clinton? And Newt Gingrich's mother said, oh, I don't think I could say. And she's like, Connie Chung leans in and sort of says, it's just between us, and like 70 million other people. But she's like, well, I don't want to use that word on television. And so Connie Chung sort of says, well, what, can you give me a sense of what it is? She's like, well, it sounds like witch. So Amy Goodman then goes to the speaker's briefing. And at the time, it wasn't like this thing where every press conference is like a sporting event where you have like 20 different angles. There was just one C-SPAN camera there. So Amy did something really smart. She went and she stood right next to the camera so that it had no option to pan anywhere else. It just had to stay on Gingrich. And she said, Speaker Gingrich, with the contract with America, you have set an agenda that is anti-women. And according to your mother, you called First Lady Hillary Clinton a bitch. When are you going to apologize to American women for calling the First Lady a bitch? And Gingrich starts going, he's just red, his shirt already was hanging on for dear life at his neckline, but then the thing's gonna pop. And Gingrich says, "I didn't say what you said, I said." And then Amy Goodman says, "So are you saying your mother is a liar?" The next day, Newt Gingrich's daily press briefing did not happen, and it never happened after that. So I'm painting houses with Phil Berrigan. I'm a college dropout. I'm falling in love with this program, Democracy Now!, and I feel like I've sort of found what I want to do in life. I want to be like Amy Goodman. So, and there's some younger people in the audience, so I'm going to use some terms you may not be familiar with, but I took out a piece of paper, and I'm going to show you guys a mind-blowing device here. It's called a pen. And it has ink in it, and I actually was able to write. It's something that's sort of like LOL texting, but except you actually put ink on the paper. All right, fine, I'll stop with this. Wait, I'm getting to the best part. So I wrote this letter to her, and I said, if you have a dog, I'll walk it. If you have a cat, I feed it. I'll wash your windows if you have any. Like, I just want to be a part of this. And then I put it in this thing called an envelope, and this is the weirdest part of the story, and the young people, I'm sorry, this may gross you out. I actually licked something with my tongue called a stamp. And okay, anyway, so I sent Amy Goodman a letter, and basically, thinking like, okay, Amy Goodman will respond any day because I'm offering to work for free and I'll do all this. Never hear from Amy Goodman. Then I send her more letters, and finally then, I've moved to New York. I'm at the Catholic Worker on the Lower East Side, and Amy Goodman shows up at the Catholic Worker because myself and a guy named Carmen Trotta, were putting on an exhibition about the life of Dorothy Day. And so Amy Goodman comes in, and as she remembers it, is that I never even introduced myself to her, that I came up in the middle of a sentence. I think I probably introduced myself. But I said, I want to work with you, I want to be like you, I want to do it. And I would go to then all of her events and do the same thing, come up to her after it. And so she had to decide whether or not to let me volunteer or get an actual restraining order against me. And ultimately she relented and let me volunteer in her show, and I sort of never left. And I list Democracy Now! As my university on all sorts of things, because that's really what it was. And it's given me a perspective, especially when young people ask me, I want to be a journalist or I want to do what you do. It's after actually more than 20 years of doing this kind of work, I've come to the realization that our approach to educating young people in this society is so outdated to the point where it's counterproductive. We're not showing faith in young people's ability to hit the ground running. We don't have enough apprenticeship opportunities. We don't have enough opportunity for them to study under people who are doing what they may want to do. We're bogging them down with so much pressure and standardized tests. And if we could find a way, there are so many young people who get lost in the system that if they had the opportunity to simply start doing it, to be with people who they want to be like, or are doing what they want to do, I believe we would produce an incredible generation of amazing teachers, educators, journalists, people that would contribute to society in such an amazing way. I'm not advising people, oh, don't go to college. But I'm saying, well, you can, yeah. That's when you get up here to sing, you can sing the Don't Go to College song. But my point is not to preach to anybody, but what I've learned from talking to so many young people is that if we gave them a chance to actually do it, to get hands-on experience, to get their fingernails dirty, they're going to be the kind of journalists that you want to read or watch or listen to. Why? Because they'll be out in the real world. They're not studying at as a course of academic theory. Journalism isn't rocket science. At the end of the day, it's like carpentry or plumbing. It's a trade where your hands should get dirty if you're doing it right, where you're learning the basic tools of it, but what really matters is what's in your heart, what's burning in your heart. Those are going to be the best journalists. The journalists I admire most that I've met around the world, none of them have a journalism degree. Some of them studied history, some of them sociology, some of them were college dropouts, some got on a motorcycle and drove to Bosnia to be a photographer and ended up being a great reporter. But we're failing right now, and it's part of the reason why our media culture is the way it is. When you watch the Sunday shows, when Chuck Todd and the boys hang out, who's on those shows talking about the new old war in Iraq? It's the same people who brought you the old new war in Iraq. It's the best way to get a seat on Meet the Press release is to actually have been part of an epic failure where hundreds of thousands of people died. Let's bring him back as an expert. Paul Wolfowitz should not be sitting on a chair with David Gergen and others. He should be sitting in a prison cell. we're living in a moment when there is a war on the world and a war on journalists. And the war on the world, which is the reason that the book that I wrote, the subtitle of it is The World is a Battlefield. I didn't come up with that phrase. That was one of Donald Rumsfeld's snowflakes, as he called them. You know, he would write these little notes to his underlings and then pass it on. They were called Rumsfeld's snowflakes, you know, just little memos. And Rumsfeld was looking at various military doctrine and US law, and he found something called the operational preparation of the battle space, which basically is an authority vested upon the military by the commander-in-chief that says, if the military commanders believe that hostilities are likely or possible in a foreign battle zone, then the Secretary of Defense can authorize the deployment of an advanced force of special operations teams to prepare the battle space for a larger scale military operation. And Rumsfeld wrote on this snowflake shortly after 9/11, well, because Al-Qaeda doesn't operate with borders, within borders and doesn't operate under a flag, it means the world is the battlefield, meaning that they could justify sending their forces anywhere across the globe. And they got a rubber stamp from Congress in the form of something called the Authorization for the Use of Military Force, which is still being used by President Obama to justify this borderless global war. Only one member of either House of Congress voted against that authorization. It was Representative Barbara Lee of California. Barbara Lee, and I recommend everyone, every year on 9/11, we should watch Barbara Lee's speech from that day as the lone member of either House of Congress that actually voted against the blank check that exists to this day that justifies the drone bombings, the invasions, the airstrikes, the covert operations. Barbara Lee was trembling when she gave that speech because she had been receiving death threats. She was under immense pressure from Nancy Pelosi and others within the Democratic leadership not to do it. And yet she got up, and every word, Barbara Lee is African-American congresswoman from the Bay Area, and she was the one person who got it right, and she got up, and she said, someone in this House needs to speak plainly about what this means. It means there can be no end to this war if you start down this path. And she was 100% right. And she warned about the extreme power that it was about, that the Congress was about to hand over to the executive branch of government. And all of the Democrats voted for that in the hysteria of the immediate aftermath of 9/11. And what they did was to help Dick Cheney fulfill his lifelong mission. And that was to segregate the executive branch away from the checks and balances system and to effectively make the White House a dictatorship when it came to implementing what they call national security policy. President Obama, when he was Senator Obama, and of course is a constitutional law scholar, railed against that system and said that there's been this tremendous executive power grab. And we need to roll that back. We need to restore the rule of law. One of his first big speeches he gave in front of the original Constitution. And he wrapped himself in the Constitution on that day when he said, I'm going to push this all back, and then proceeded to do the exact opposite over the next 5 years of his presidency, to the point where one of his enduring legacies when it comes to these issues is going to be as the man who legitimized and made permanent the Dick Cheney view of national security policy in the United States. Dick Cheney can act like he can't stand the Obama presidency. He can feign this line that Obama is a secret socialist who wants Mao Zedong to be the minister of the economy in this country, and that Bill Ayers is going to be the Secretary of Defense, and that Reverend Wright is going to be the head of the CIA. But no one is happier than Dick Cheney that Barack Obama was president when it comes to these issues, because Obama got away with things and extended programs that if John McCain had been elected in 2008 or Mitt Romney in 2012, people would have been in the streets about. A president saying, I can assassinate an American citizen who hasn't even been indicted for a crime that is not on an active battlefield. I don't have to charge them with a crime, but I can order their execution and serve as judge, jury, and executioner. Jack Goldsmith, who was a former leading lawyer in the Bush administration, said, the Democrats went crazy when we were warrantlessly wiretapping people. Now they're executing people who aren't even charged with crimes. Isn't that something? This was a Bush lawyer saying this. So when we look right now at the situation in Syria and Iraq, President Obama now is saying that he wants to go back to Congress and he wants to get a new authorization for the use of military force. It's a cynical political move because Barack Obama has already asserted that he believes he has all the authorities he needs and that under Article 2 of the Constitution, as the commander-in-chief, that it's his prerogative if he wants to take these actions. Now, there's been legal challenges to this, but they always fail, and every president violates the War Powers Act. These guys are going to do it regardless of if Congress says yes or no. No matter what the law says, they will always find a way around it. I know that a lot of people are watching with great sorrow what's happening in Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. And I know that even in this community, there's great debate about this. And as I've contemplated it myself, and I'm totally against any U.S. military action in that region, but I also, I know there's a divided house here and elsewhere, and I've taken that seriously, and I've thought about it, and I didn't come to that position lightly or just because of some dogmatic commitment to pacifism. I think you can make a moral argument against the U.S. conducting more military operations in that region. I think it's pretty clear that a lot of civilians are being killed. I also think it's clear that there's the potential for tremendous blowback. You know, we've heard this story before in history where we say we're going to back the moderate rebels to achieve this goal, and then the so-called moderate rebels turn out to be people who fly planes into buildings or end up decapitating people or mass raping women. We've seen this story play out before. But on a moral level, I'm reminded of a story Daniel Berrigan told me about Thomas Merton. And I was looking today to try to see if it had been published anywhere, and this would be the place of experts if anyone has actually seen the context of this. But Merton was asked about the Vietnam War and confronted with the fact that Ho Chi Minh's forces were also committing crimes and were also committing civilians, and he was asked, whose side are you on in the Vietnam War? And Merton said, I'm on the side of the people that are being burned, which, if you think about it, is an incredible answer that sort of defies any gotcha journalism, that defies some ability to make everything look muddy, well, there's this way or there's that way. Wouldn't it be something if we could say and mean that we're on the side of the people that are being burned? Because that comes with a tremendous moral burden. It's easy to sit in the comfort of your home and say, we have to do something, and that something necessarily has to be military in nature. What's harder is to do what people like David Dellinger did during the Vietnam War, which is to go to pick up American POWs and then to directly confront Ho Chi Minh in person over the very crimes that were being committed there, over that inconsistency. You don't get in bed with little guns or big guns. You stay consistent in your moral principles. But I believe that if we go down the path in Iraq and Syria of training, equipping, and arming so-called moderate rebels, which is the current plan, that we are going to get hit back again. I also think that the United States is sending a message to that region that it believes it has the right to always intervene militarily. And let's face it, the track record of the United States in that region is one epic war crime. And we are not, even if military solution was the right path, and everyone believed that, the U.S. isn't the right party to even to do it. So where does that leave us on a moral level? What is our response? Your principle, my principle, our principles are tested not when vulgar, vile, cartoonish villains like Cheney and Bush are in office. I truly believe that Dick Cheney spends every waking hour in a cave somewhere thinking of how to I don't think of Obama and his people like that. I think that there's a lot of the same net results from the Bush-Cheney program, but I don't think that that's how they're looking at it. So to me, it's a boring conversation to talk about Bush and Cheney and their war crimes. We know that. We have it nailed. We know who they were. Your principles are tested when someone you may have voted for is the one doing this, or someone you held your nose and voted for, or someone who on some issues you agree with on this, this, and this, but I have problems with that. That's when your real principles are tested. Where do you stand? There's no such thing as Democratic cruise missiles and Republican cruise missiles. And until we get beyond, this system where so many people cede their conscience to members of one political party or the other every few years, nothing will fundamentally change. And at the end of the day, the number one issue, whether, and there's activists back there that are working on trying to get single-payer health care, and there are people fighting about police brutality in communities across the country, and of course, we're all waiting to see what's going to happen in Ferguson. And there are people that are fighting for the rights of immigrants in this country, those with and those without documents. And there are people fighting against war and to keep abortion safe and legal in this country. In many places now, there's a huge battle over it. Whatever battle you're waging or issues are important to you, unless we get huge corporations out of our electoral process, nothing's ever going to change. Nothing is ever going to change. In closing, I want to thank the Thomas Merton Center for giving me this award, which I look through the list of people who've won it in the past, and I honestly don't understand what I'm doing on that list, but I will absolutely cherish this award. And the thought I want to leave you with is actually a story that I heard about an old anarchist who was at the Catholic Worker, and he was a World War I draft resistor named Eamon Hennessy. And Hennessy was picketing in front of the White House and against World War I. And a newsman came up to him and said, Mr. Hennessy, you're not going to change their mind. And he said, maybe, but they sure as hell aren't going to change mine. And I think I want to end on that because I think that what it is to be human in our society is to resist injustice. Even if you think you're not going to win when it comes to efficacy at the end of the day, the fact that you fought the good fight means that you lived, means that you were alive, means that you were here. I want to win. I want to stop these wars. I want to try to change our political system in this country so that it actually represents what Amy Goodman calls the silenced majority in this country. But even if we don't win that battle in our lifetime, because we fought it, it means we are alive, and it means we are leaving something to the next generation. And so that's our